So here's the thing. I spent the last 6 years scaling up a brick and mortar business to over $6 million in revenue. And by all accounts, I've achieved what most people would consider as some level of success. Yet the reality is that more than 50% of that time, I was suffering and struggling with some of the darkest moments in my life. And I think that part of the reason for that was because I just couldn't quite find people or content available that truly reflected some of the experiences that I was going through throughout my journey in entrepreneurship. And so my goal with this podcast is to be able to have the content that I put out at least resonate with one person in the world. And if it can do that, then I would consider this podcast and the time that I invested into it all well worth it. And so the focus of my podcast really is going to be on trying to shine light on some of these taboo topics that are generally not talked about in most of the content that's available in this sort of genre. Because I find that a lot of times the content that isn't available comes from the lens of someone who's already achieved a wild level of success. Seldomly does it come from the lens and perspective of someone who is halfway up the mountain, so to speak. And so my goal is really to have this content to be as unfiltered as possible, recognizing that there are certain limitations, right? You know, the people that I deal with within the businesses that I'm associated with, these are real people, these are real lives. And of course, those are details that I won't be able to share freely. As well, the business practices, the proprietary information that I work with is also highly confidential and highly sensitive in nature. And I won't be able to share those details as well. What I can say though, is that this podcast will reflect my own unfiltered thoughts, self-reflections, and lessons that I have learned and will continue to learn along the way as well. And again, hopefully it just resonates with one single person. And on this note, by no means does my views and my reflections and the content that I put out reflect any of the views that are held by the businesses that I'm affiliated with. These are just my own personal self-reflections at the end of the day. And so I thought, for this first episode, I kick things off by talking about 3 misconceptions that I've come across about entrepreneurship in the last 6 years. The first one I'll start off with is how lonely the journey is. I think oftentimes entrepreneurship is depicted in a way where, someone works hard, invests a significant portion of their time over the course of a couple of years, and then is able to reach a level of success and then effectively retire or, work very limited hours managing their business on their laptop, sitting on a beach somewhere. Typically the business is e-commerce related or drop shipping related. But in reality, that really couldn't be further from the. I think part of the reason why the journey is so lonely is in fact because of the sheer amount of hours that you have to put in order to build something of substance. I can confidently say that over the past 6 years, I've really only taken maybe less than 20 days off throughout that time frame. And each and every day that I work is, anywhere between 14 to 20 hours in length. And by no means am I promoting that level of work-life balance, or however you want to term it. That's not what it is at all. I think that everyone has their own limitations, their own boundaries, their own views. This is just simply what I've done over the past several years. Now, getting back to it, I think building on the lonely comment that I made earlier, I think the other reason why it is really lonely is because, the problems that you deal with and the challenges that you face, they take up so much mental resources, so much of your attention, that it becomes so challenging to, sit in any sort of environment where you feel present. Because, problems that you need to resolve, they don't just go away at the end of a workday. They're still there on your to-do list. And if you don't deal with it, then there are implications to the business. There are implications to, the livelihoods of the employees working within the business, so on and so forth. And so it takes so much of your attention, and you become so fixated on trying to address them. And you get into this sort of vicious loop where, you think that, okay, if I solve this problem, then I'll be able to, have more time. But, unfortunately, the nature of business is that once you solve a problem, there's another problem that you have to address, right? And these can be problems such as, perhaps you have a very toxic employee working within your business that's, detrimenting, the service experience for your customers, or they're, detrimenting, the well-being of, the other staff working around them. Or it can be, situations where you've unfortunately lost half your staff because they burnt out. And now you're trying to, plug all of these different holes, so to speak, within the business in order to ensure that it can keep running. These are real challenges that, entrepreneurs go through ultimately. Now, I think related to this notion of loneliness is the notion of broken relationships. And so I mentioned it before. It's really, really difficult to be fully present when you're spending time with significant others or friends, family, because your mind is just constantly just living somewhere else and just focused on something completely different. And naturally, as a result of that, these relationships, they end up falling apart. They end up breaking. And the people that you love so dearly and the people that you grind and work hard for, unfortunately, they may not necessarily be able to withstand the pressure of not necessarily having their partner fully present during this time. And we can't blame them ultimately. Everyone, I think as people, we seek after connection, right? And sometimes, unfortunately, just during these certain chapters and seasons, you end up not being able to provide that, to the degree that you wish to. I think the third misconception that I'll talk about today is the notion of entrepreneurs being or appearing, very confident in nature. I think to some degree, and again, this is just speaking on behalf of my own personal experience, there are some facets where I'm incredibly confident in my skill sets. But I think the more and more that I've reflected over the years, the more I've started to realize that, and again, at least for myself, and I've definitely heard this of others as well too, is that part of that drive for an entrepreneur typically comes from a place of void. It comes from a place where they're trying to prove something to themselves, but they can't, with every sort of milestone, they still can't, achieve it, right? And, I've shared this with a number of people in my personal life over the past several years, but it's almost like I'm constantly trying to seek my own personal validation. And unfortunately, I just can't acquire it. I can't get it because every time I feel like I'm getting closer, it feels like the goalpost has moved. And it's such an odd feeling when we recognize, or at least when I recognize that a lot of people struggle with the opposite issue, which is finding validation from others. It's a whole different beast on its own when you're trying to find your own self-validation. And so that brings me to the end of this episode. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you do, feel free to like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what other content you'd like to see. And again, my goal is to at least reach one person out there and hopefully create meaningful content that people can really connect with, especially, for those entrepreneurs who are just starting out their journey, or, those who haven't quite acquired any sort of tangible level of success quite yet.